It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was unfolding, and it involved Charlotte. What first appeared to be another rumor soon became a royal storm, one now tied to a forgotten inheritance many believed had vanished forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For weeks, royal correspondents had quietly noted that something unusual was taking place behind closed doors. Public appearances remained carefully controlled, schedules appeared unchanged, and yet those familiar with the rhythm of palace life sensed an unmistakable shift. Reports suggest that an unexpected meeting involving Prince William, Princess Catherine, and several senior legal advisors had taken place under extraordinary levels of confidentiality. Even by royal standards, the atmosphere surrounding those discussions appeared unusually tense. Staff members were reportedly instructed to avoid unnecessary conversations, while aides who normally handled routine communications maintained a remarkable silence. Such secrecy only fueled speculation that something much larger was unfolding beneath the surface. Those whispers became even more intense when insiders began speaking of a forgotten provision linked to the late Queen Mother. For decades, the matter had seemingly disappeared into the vast archives of royal history, remembered only by a handful of trusted figures and historians who believed the story had long ago faded into obscurity. Yet suddenly, those old stories were being revisited. Different interpretations emerging from royal circles suggested that legal experts had uncovered documents requiring immediate attention, and the implications appeared significant enough to leave even seasoned advisors deeply concerned. Questions began spreading quietly through the highest levels of the institution. Why now? Why had this issue resurfaced after so many years? And perhaps more importantly, who stood to be affected by whatever had been discovered? Observers could not help but notice the emotions surrounding the family. Princess Catherine, normally composed under immense pressure, reportedly appeared deeply affected after leaving the private discussions. Meanwhile, Prince William was said to have spent much of the evening away from public attention, with Princess Charlotte herself offering comfort and reassurance as speculation intensified around them. Palace administrative streams, ranging from longtime correspondents to those familiar with royal traditions, claimed that unusual activity had been building for weeks before anyone outside those circles became aware of it. Some whispered that the issue involved far more than inheritance. Others hinted that competing expectations and old family promises were suddenly colliding. And as the rumors spread beyond Britain, attention began shifting toward members of the wider royal family living overseas, raising even more questions about what this hidden chapter might ultimately reveal. The more people searched for answers, the more mysterious the story became. Historians revisited forgotten records, commentators discussed long-buried agreements, and royal insiders continued speaking in cautious tones. What had first been dismissed as another passing rumor was rapidly transforming into something far more explosive. Because if the whispers were true, the consequences would stretch across generations and reopen a chapter many believed had been sealed forever. But the mystery surrounding Charlotte wasn't simply about a forgotten gift. It was connected to a royal promise made decades earlier, one few people even remembered existed. Long before the world knew Charlotte's name, a quiet arrangement had reportedly been discussed behind palace doors. Hidden among family records and personal instructions connected to the Queen Mother was a legacy so unusual that even seasoned royal historians believed it had been lost to history. As speculation surrounding Charlotte intensified, attention gradually shifted away from the present and toward a chapter buried deep within the monarchy's past. Reports suggest that the Queen Mother's estate had always represented far more than property or wealth. To those closest to the institution, it carried extraordinary emotional significance, standing as a symbol of continuity, sacrifice, and traditions that had survived wars, crises, and generations of change. While much of the public remembered the Queen Mother for her warmth and resilience, those familiar with royal history often spoke of her deep understanding of legacy and her determination to preserve certain values long after she was gone. It was this reputation that made the recent whispers so astonishing, because according to various interpretations circulating within royal circles, some of her most private wishes had never truly disappeared. Over the years, historians had quietly debated whether special provisions connected to the Queen Mother existed. Some dismissed the stories as little more than palace folklore, while others believed trusted advisors had carefully safeguarded certain instructions that were never intended for public discussion. Those questions remained unanswered for decades. Yet recent reviews inside royal archives reportedly changed everything. Sources close to palace administration claimed that archivists revisiting old records encountered material that immediately attracted the attention of senior legal experts. Suddenly, documents once thought irrelevant were being examined with extraordinary care, and conversations that had remained silent for years were beginning to surface once again. What exactly had been discovered remained closely guarded, but one thing appeared undeniable. Something buried in the past had unexpectedly returned to demand attention. According to insiders, Prince William and Princess Catherine were among the first to be informed about the surprising developments. Different interpretations of those discussions suggested that the implications extended far beyond sentimental value. There was growing recognition that the issue touched upon promises and arrangements that had survived through generations. Even more intriguing was the mysterious reputation surrounding the estate itself. Within certain royal circles, it had reportedly become known as forbidden, not because of scandal, but because decades of secrecy had transformed it into something almost mythical. Few people spoke openly about it. Fewer still claimed to understand the full story. That silence only deepened the fascination and added another layer to the mystery that was rapidly consuming royal insiders. As word quietly spread among family members, reports suggest reactions ranged from disbelief to astonishment. Those familiar with the situation claimed that several senior figures were left stunned by the possible consequences, because if the forgotten instructions proved authentic, they could reshape expectations that many had accepted for years. Inevitably, one question began dominating every conversation. If the Queen Mother had indeed left behind something so carefully protected, then who had she intended to receive it? What started as whispers about history was quickly becoming a battle over destiny itself. And as uncertainty gave way to growing anticipation, an even more sensitive issue emerged, one that would draw attention far beyond Britain and place. Competing expectations under an unforgiving spotlight. But uncovering the forgotten promise only created a far more explosive question: who exactly had the Queen Mother intended to receive it? As whispers intensified, another name unexpectedly surfaced inside royal circles. What had begun as a private discussion surrounding Charlotte suddenly expanded into a sensitive debate involving competing expectations and a branch of the family living thousands of miles away. The questions surrounding the Queen Mother's forgotten promise had already sent shockwaves through those closest to the institution, but reports suggest that the mystery became even more delicate when conversations reportedly turned toward possible descendants connected to the inheritance. For years, many had assumed that the passage of time had erased any lingering uncertainty. Yet as legal experts and historians revisited old records, entirely new interpretations began to emerge. Suddenly, the issue was no longer confined to the walls of royal residences or the archives that had safeguarded decades of family history. It had become something far more emotionally charged, because hidden within the growing speculation was the possibility that modern generations, born into an entirely different world, might somehow find themselves connected to decisions made long before they arrived. According to various reports circulating within royal circles, one name unexpectedly became part of those conversations: Lilibet. Her connection to the late Queen Elizabeth's beloved nickname had always carried symbolic significance, and the mere suggestion that her future could intersect with the Queen Mother's long-forgotten arrangements immediately intensified the atmosphere surrounding the entire matter. Palace insiders reportedly described long discussions involving multiple interpretations of historical provisions, with legal advisors examining every possibility with extraordinary caution. Different readings of the old conditions appeared to produce competing arguments, and no one wanted to risk overlooking details that might alter the course of royal expectations. The stakes had become too important, and the emotional consequences too profound. Meanwhile, supporters on both sides quietly began debating what the future might hold. Royal commentators and media figures speculated endlessly over whether changing times should influence arrangements established under very different circumstances. Some argued that history should remain untouched. Others questioned whether traditions crafted decades earlier could still apply to a modern royal families spread across continents. Reports suggest that questions surrounding residence, duty, and lifelong commitment to the institution soon became central to those discussions. The issue was no longer merely about inheritance. It had evolved into a deeper debate about identity itself. What defined belonging? Was blood enough? Or had generations of royal history always placed greater emphasis on service and responsibility? As these difficult questions multiplied, tensions reportedly increased behind the scenes. Those familiar with palace traditions claimed that emotions were beginning to run high, not because of hostility, but because everyone understood the sensitivity of what was unfolding. Families were involved. Expectations had quietly formed over time, and no matter what conclusions eventually emerged, disappointment seemed inevitable for someone. Prince William and Princess Catherine reportedly remained focused on protecting Charlotte from the growing storm, while advisors continued their painstaking work in search of clarity. Yet with every passing day, the mystery seemed to deepen rather than disappear, because hidden within those centuries-old records were details few had anticipated. And as hope, uncertainty, and speculation reached unprecedented levels, senior advisors reportedly made discoveries that would soon transform the entire conversation in ways almost nobody had imagined. Yet as expectations rose, senior advisors reportedly uncovered details that would dramatically reshape the entire debate. What royal advisors discovered inside archived records reportedly left even experienced officials speechless. A detail overlooked for years suddenly transformed speculation into something much larger, a revelation capable of rewriting expectations that many had quietly accepted. After weeks of uncertainty, mounting speculation, and increasingly sensitive discussions, reports suggest that royal archivists decided to conduct an even deeper examination of preserved records connected to the Queen Mother's estate. What had initially been viewed as a routine review reportedly evolved into something far more extraordinary. Those familiar with the process claimed that layers of correspondence, legal notes, and historical references were revisited with exceptional care. For years, many had assumed that every important detail had already been uncovered. Yet according to insiders, hidden within those records were clues that had somehow escaped attention for decades. As experts compared old documents with previously overlooked materials, a remarkable picture slowly began to emerge, and with every new discovery, long-standing assumptions appeared to grow weaker. According to various interpretations circulating among royal observers, forgotten clauses allegedly came to light during those confidential reviews. Their significance reportedly stunned even historians who had spent years studying the complexities of royal inheritance. Suddenly, questions that had seemed impossible to answer began moving toward clarity. Senior legal experts were quietly brought into discussions, and extraordinary efforts were made to ensure complete discretion. Palace staff maintained an almost impenetrable silence, understanding that the implications of what had been uncovered could send shockwaves throughout the family. It was no longer simply a matter of competing expectations or emotional attachments. The issue had become one of understanding the intentions left behind by previous generations, intentions that many believed had already been fully understood. Sources close to royal circles suggest that Prince William received a detailed briefing outlining the possible consequences of these discoveries. Different interpretations of those meetings described an atmosphere filled with both relief and astonishment. For months, uncertainty had cast a shadow over everyone involved, but now pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Historians reportedly described the findings as remarkable, not because they introduced entirely new ideas, but because they highlighted principles that had always been present yet somehow overlooked. Again and again, experts found themselves returning to two themes that appeared deeply important to those who created the original arrangements: service and continuity. These concepts, according to reports, stood at the heart of everything. They represented values cherished by generations of royals and principles considered essential to preserving the institution itself. As those themes became clearer, multiple assumptions surrounding the inheritance reportedly began collapsing with startling speed. Ideas that had once seemed plausible suddenly appeared far less convincing when measured against the original intentions hidden within the records. Questions that had dominated private discussions for weeks slowly started giving way to something more decisive. There was still caution, of course, because everyone understood the emotional consequences attached to whatever conclusion emerged. Yet beneath that caution was an unmistakable realization. The mystery that had fueled endless speculation was approaching its final chapter. The forgotten promise was beginning to reveal its true meaning, and with it came answers that would forever alter expectations across generations. But once the meaning of those records became clear, there was no longer any room for uncertainty. For years, speculation had surrounded countless possibilities. Yet when the final interpretation reportedly emerged, one name stood above every other. And that realization sent shockwaves through royal circles already struggling to contain growing tensions. The weeks of uncertainty, competing theories, and increasingly emotional discussions had left many wondering whether a clear answer would ever emerge. But according to reports circulating within the highest levels of royal administration, the painstaking work carried out by historians, legal advisors, and archivists had finally produced a conclusion. After decades of mystery and months of renewed scrutiny, one name reportedly began appearing at the center of every conversation: Princess Charlotte. What had once seemed like an unimaginable possibility was now becoming the focus of legal interpretations that many insiders believed reflected the true intentions behind the Queen Mother's forgotten arrangements. Those familiar with the matter described a mood that was both solemn and deeply emotional, because with clarity came consequences, and with answers came the realization that years of assumptions had quietly been leading toward a very different outcome. Sources close to palace circles suggest that Prince William and Princess Catherine received confirmation during highly confidential briefings that brought an end to months of uncertainty. Different interpretations of those meetings describe moments filled with disbelief, gratitude, and an overwhelming awareness of the responsibility attached to such a discovery. This was never simply about wealth or possession. Those who had studied the history surrounding the Queen Mother's legacy reportedly understood that the estate represented something far deeper. It symbolized continuity, it represented memory, and perhaps most importantly, it carried the values that previous generations had fought to preserve. Reports suggest that both William and Catherine remained focused not on celebration, but on protecting Charlotte from the extraordinary attention that such revelations would inevitably attract. Across royal circles, reactions were said to range from astonishment to quiet reflection. Family members reportedly struggled to absorb the implications of what had been uncovered. Historians, meanwhile, pointed toward Charlotte's unique position within the modern monarchy. According to various royal commentators, the significance of the decision lay not only in bloodlines but also in the symbolic bridge Charlotte represented between past traditions and future generations. Sources claim that the conclusion reflected the enduring principles of continuity and service that had repeatedly surfaced throughout the review process. What had once appeared to be scattered fragments of history now seemed to fit together with remarkable consistency. For many observers, the outcome felt less like a surprise and more like the completion of a story that had been quietly unfolding for decades. As word slowly began spreading beyond confidential circles, courtiers reportedly started preparing for the public interest that would surely follow. They understood that fascination with the inheritance would extend far beyond discussions about land or property. The story had evolved into something much larger. It was about legacy. It was about promises made long ago and the extraordinary power those promises continued to hold generations later. Yet beneath the growing sense of certainty remained an unavoidable truth that nobody could ignore. Because if Charlotte had indeed become the focus of those final conclusions, then other hopes and expectations would inevitably face disappointment. And as the implications settled across the family, some painful realities were becoming impossible to avoid. But confirmation of Charlotte's position inevitably meant that other expectations would face a painful reality. The moment the legal picture reportedly became undeniable, hopes surrounding alternative outcomes quietly faded. What some had imagined as an open question suddenly became something far more final and considerably more controversial. By the time the final interpretations had been reviewed, those closest to the process reportedly understood that the period of uncertainty was drawing to an end. For months, speculation had allowed countless theories to flourish. Supporters of different possibilities had clung to hope, believing that competing claims might still find room within the complicated traditions of royal history. Yet according to palace insiders, the deeper experts examined the evidence, the clearer the conclusions became. Long-standing conditions tied to the original arrangements reportedly left little room for alternative interpretations. What had once appeared flexible now seemed remarkably precise. And with every layer that was uncovered, expectations that had quietly developed over the years began confronting an increasingly painful reality. Senior advisors reportedly emphasized one principle above all others: precedent. Those familiar with royal traditions argued that continuity had always depended upon respecting the intentions of previous generations, even when modern emotions or public debates complicated the picture. According to various reports, legal experts repeatedly returned to the same conclusion. The issue was not about popularity, it was not about headlines, and it was certainly not about rewarding one side while punishing another. Instead, it centered on preserving the values that had guided royal arrangements for decades. Palace insiders described the outcome as decisive, not because everyone agreed with it emotionally, but because the historical framework surrounding the inheritance appeared impossible to ignore. The answer, they suggested, had been hidden in plain sight all along. As news of those conclusions slowly filtered beyond private circles, royal commentators began discussing the wider implications. Debate intensified not only in Britain but across international audiences fascinated by every development surrounding the House of Windsor. Supporters from different perspectives reacted passionately. Some believed tradition had ultimately prevailed. Others questioned whether changing times demanded new interpretations. Once again, conversations about modern royal identity resurfaced. What role should geography play? How much importance should be placed on service? Could historical promises adapt to an entirely different era? These questions sparked endless discussions, revealing just how deeply invested people had become in a story that at its heart revolved around family legacy and the enduring weight of history. Yet despite the intensity of public reactions, reports suggest that those closest to the matter viewed it through a very different lens. According to insiders, the issue gradually stopped being about emotion and became something much larger. Legacy. The Queen Mother's intentions, the continuity of the institution, and the responsibilities passed from one generation to another had become the true focus. For Prince William and Princess Catherine, protecting Charlotte from the growing storm reportedly remained their greatest priority. For historians, the discoveries represented a remarkable chapter in royal history. And for the monarchy itself, the consequences extended far beyond the boundaries of a single inheritance. Because what had begun as whispers about forgotten documents had evolved into a conversation touching the very foundations of the institution. The implications were no longer confined to archives or legal opinions. They were beginning to shape how future generations would understand duty, belonging, and the meaning of royal legacy itself. But the story was no longer confined to lawyers and historians. It had become a matter that touched the future of the monarchy itself. Behind the headlines and speculation stood a family confronting emotions far more complicated than outsiders could imagine. Because for those closest to the crown, the inheritance represented far more than land. It represented memory, sacrifice, and continuity. As public fascination continued to grow and debates spread far beyond Britain, those within royal circles reportedly viewed the entire situation through a deeply personal lens. To outsiders, the story appeared to revolve around documents, inheritance, and competing expectations. But according to sources familiar with the family's private feelings, the reality was far more emotional. For Prince William especially, reports suggest that the outcome carried a meaning that words could scarcely capture. It was not simply about a forgotten estate or a long-buried promise. Instead, many close to the future king believed it represented a connection between generations, a reminder that the sacrifices and principles of those who came before still carried weight in the modern world. In a time when the monarchy faced constant scrutiny and change, that realization reportedly held enormous significance. Princess Catherine, according to various interpretations, was equally moved by what the discoveries meant for Charlotte's future. Throughout the uncertainty and speculation, insiders claimed that her greatest concern had never been the inheritance itself, but the emotional burden that attention could place upon a young princess. Those close to the family described Catherine as deeply aware of the responsibilities attached to royal life and determined to ensure that Charlotte remained protected from the pressures surrounding the story. Reports suggest that both parents were united in one important mission: shield Charlotte from the noise, preserve her childhood, and allow her to grow without being consumed by expectations created long before she was born. For them, the legacy carried responsibility rather than privilege. Meanwhile, senior royals reportedly rallied quietly around the principles that had guided the institution for generations. There were no grand declarations and no dramatic gestures. Instead, palace officials focused on maintaining unity during a period that many understood could easily become divisive. Historians observing the developments repeatedly pointed toward the enduring influence of the Queen Mother herself. Decades after her passing, her values and priorities appeared to continue shaping conversations inside the House of Windsor. According to royal commentators, that influence represented one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire story. Time had changed the faces occupying the royal stage, but the voices of previous generations still echoed through the traditions they left behind. And perhaps nowhere was that influence more visible than in the principles of duty and continuity that had guided every stage of the process. Outside palace walls, public interest showed no signs of fading. Every new discussion only strengthened the sense that this story had touched something deeper than inheritance. People became fascinated not because of wealth, but because of what the revelations seemed to symbolize. The legacy of previous generations had become impossible to ignore. Promises made decades earlier had survived political change, family struggles, and the passing of time itself. And as historians reflected upon the extraordinary chain of events, many concluded that the true importance of the story had very little to do with ownership, because ultimately, what had endured across generations was not property but values, and those values would continue influencing the future long after the headlines themselves disappeared. But the greatest significance of all lay not in what Charlotte had received, but in what the inheritance symbolized for generations yet to come. Decades after her passing, the Queen Mother's influence reportedly continues to shape the future of the House of Windsor. And as the dust settled around one of the most surprising inheritance stories in recent memory, many inside royal circles were left reflecting on the same powerful truth. As emotions gradually settled and the endless speculation finally gave way to acceptance, attention began shifting away from controversy and back toward the remarkable woman whose presence seemed to linger over every stage of the story. According to historians and those familiar with royal traditions, the Queen Mother's legacy has remained one of the most respected and enduring forces within the House of Windsor. Long after her passing, the values she championed and the principles she protected reportedly continue to influence decisions in ways that few outside royal circles fully appreciate. Her understanding of continuity, duty, and family responsibility helped shape generations of monarchs, heirs, and future leaders. And perhaps that was why so many observers viewed the extraordinary events surrounding Charlotte's inheritance not as a sudden surprise, but as another chapter in a story that had begun many decades earlier. Reports suggest that for Prince William and Princess Catherine, the outcome represented far more than the resolution of a legal mystery. The inheritance itself came to symbolize continuity between generations. It served as a reminder that traditions established long ago could still carry meaning in a rapidly changing world. According to various royal historians, the estate's significance was never rooted in wealth alone. Instead, it carried emotional and historical importance that connected past, present, and future. Stories, memories, and promises appeared to flow through the generations, binding the family together in ways that transcended headlines and public debates. Even as society evolved, the foundations upon which the monarchy had been built continued to influence decisions made in modern times. And in that respect, many experts describe the entire development as extraordinary. Public fascination with the story showed just how deeply people remained invested in the royal family and its history. Debates spread across continents, discussions filled newspapers and broadcasts, and supporters from every perspective offered their own interpretations. Yet despite the differing opinions, one thing became increasingly clear. This story had captured imaginations because it touched something timeless. Historians noted that future generations might look back upon these events differently, seeing them not through the lens of controversy, but through the lens of legacy. What seemed dramatic in the present often became meaningful with the passing of time. And perhaps years from now, people would remember not the arguments or the speculation, but the extraordinary way a promise made long ago continued to echo across generations. In the end, what began as whispers hidden behind palace walls evolved into something much more profound. The mystery, the debates, and the emotions all gradually gave way to a larger understanding. This had never truly been about winners and losers. It was about preserving the intentions of those who came before and honoring the values they believed were worth protecting. The Queen Mother's influence had survived the passage of time, and through that influence, Her legacy continued to shape the future of the monarchy. For many inside royal circles, that realization carried a quiet power greater than any inheritance itself. And while the headlines focused on who inherited the forbidden estate, the deeper story was about something far more enduring: the power of promises, the weight of history, and the quiet legacy that refuses to disappear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.